Hi, I'm Victor Oliver, and today I'm giving a sort of brief little talk about the American situation. We've just seen extraordinary scenes on 6th of January when there was what looked like an attempted insurrection. So I'll be looking at Donald Trump's chart and Joe Biden's and the USA's. What I'm going to do in this talk is approach it from what's known as a Draconic point of view. Draconic astrology actually is an ancient approach to the subject. I'm not going to teach it today. It's too involved. I am giving lectures throughout this year on Draconic. So what I'm going to do today is just to sell the message, so to speak, to give you the interpretation from a Draconic point of view. So it's not necessary to understand how I arrived at these conclusions, although I will show you charts to demonstrate how it works. And the only thing to understand about the Draconic chart is that it is a moon-based chart. So you're repositioning the North Node in the natal chart to 0 degrees Aries. So you create a new chart, in effect, that looks at underlying reasons, life purposes, the subtext to things. In a birth chart, you'll be looking at spiritual purposes in life, the life direction. In mundane charts, you're looking at the underlying causes, underlying reasons, and also things which perhaps in the usual tropical chart are not emphasized, okay? So what I'm going to do is to put up, I'm going to share my screen to show 3 charts, and we'll rattle through these pretty quickly. Just bear with me for a moment. So, and I'll just broaden the screen as well, so that you can see the screen better. There we have it. Now then, this is Donald Trump's, not his actual birth chart as such, not his tropical birth chart, but this is known as the Draconic solar return. As we know, he was born on 14th of June, 1946. But in Draconic system, the planets move at a different pace. And so his actual solar return birthday this year, 2020, or last year actually, his last birthday, I mean, I was actually on 22nd of June. And that's determined by when the Draconic sun was exactly conjunct. The Draconic transit sun was exactly conjunct his natal Draconic sun at 2 degrees 7 minutes, okay? And that determines his Draconic birthday. Now, the question was, I drew this chart up some time ago to address the question of whether he was likely to win the presidency. This chart doesn't actually answer the question specifically, but what it does, it alludes to an answer. And this is demonstrated by the amount of Aries signs that you see here, because in his Draconic birth chart, he's actually an Aries, which some people might say describes him better than Gemini at times, given that then his sun is ruled by Mars. And Mars, as we know, is a sign that's quite aggressive, it's dynamic, but is given to confrontation. That's the problem with Mars, although we won't get up in the morning without the Martian energy. And so when I was looking at the question of what's happening in the next year ahead from his 2020 birthday, all this Aries in his 10th and 11th houses, the 10th is the house of life direction, but in the mundane chart, it's also the house of leadership, going into the 11th house, which in the natal chart has to do with social connections, professional networks, that sort of thing. All this Aries told me that he was going in a new direction. The fact that it's in the area of power is interesting. Whether that means his political career continues, I can't answer that specific question, but it definitely told me that he was going in a new area. And I suppose the point of this is that if you were seeking re-election, you would not be going towards Aries, because Aries is taking you in a new direction, whereas a re-election is more of the same. So I deduced from the Draconic chart that he wasn't likely to win the election, just simply from all the Aries. Just to look at 1 or 2 other interesting things in this chart. So the Draconic solar return puts Mars in his 7th house, which is not necessarily the best place for it, because it's the domain of Libra, it's the domain of relationships, business, and so forth. It does, in one sense, suggest that more of his energies are going to be directed, given that Mars is actually ruling all this energy up in the 10th and 11th houses. So Mars in the 7th house is really fighting. The fact it's in Sagittarius relates this to legal matters, justice, things like that. So I think we're going to see a lot of activity. I mean, we know this to some extent already, but it's interesting to see it reflected in the chart. In one sense, it relates him more to energies to do with business and his social and professional, although more social actually, but related to business too, energies. At another level in Sagittarius, this relates it to questions of justice and litigation. But also interestingly, down in the 5th house, we have his Jupiter and Pluto exactly conjunct in Libra. So Libra is the natural place of the 7th house. Jupiter is the natural sign of justice. You know, we relate it to courts. So I think a lot of his energies are going to be directed towards litigation, that sort of thing. This is very marked in his chart. It's interesting also to see that his draconic midheavens are very close to the moon. So I think he's retaining quite a hold on the people. Of course, one can't anticipate every eventuality in a horoscope. So I'm only looking this in broad terms about the future. And so new direction, a lot of litigation. And certainly I don't think we've seen the last of Donald Trump. Let's move on to another matter. And this is the inauguration day when Joe Biden becomes the 46th president. Just to explain this, it's known as a tri-wheel chart. The inner wheel is the horoscope of America. You see Sagittarius rising there. Its sun is in Cancer. The middle chart are the the tropical transits for inauguration. In other words, this is where the planets are in the sky at the time that Biden becomes the president, 46th president. And the outside wheel are the draconic transits. And I'm not going to go through all of this. My particular focus is on the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which in itself is pretty volatile because you've got Mars, which has got all this dynamic, fast action, Uranus, which is unpredictable, can be rather perverse. It, in its best expression, is pioneering, inventive, that sort of thing. And in the tropical chart, we see that it's in the 5th house, opposing all this Scorpio energy in the draconic. Now, what I don't quite like about this is that Mars doesn't really particularly like being in Taurus. The two energies are not very compatible. Doesn't mean that whatever we're talking about or whoever we're talking about is doomed. It doesn't work that way in astrology. It just presents greater challenges. There's going to be a bit of a grind here. The fact that Uranus is involved, I think, adds a volatility. So that in one expression, you've got two fixed signs in opposition and very volatile, very mixed energies. So this tells me immediately that America is heavily divided. Well, we know that already, but like I said to you about Donald Trump's chart, it's interesting to see these things expressed symbolically in the horoscope. So there's no question the divided state of the nation. Mars in Taurus tries to restore, it wants to, in the loosest sense, heal, but repair, that sort of thing, bring things back together again. But you have all this Scorpio energy too. And in old astrology, Mars actually rules all this energy. So we have a lot of martial energy going on here, even though the 5th house is Venus's place of joy, or however we want to put it in the old astrology. And so you could argue that Venus is ruling this energy. But I think given all when you put it all together, we're looking at quite a divided thing. And there is the potential, I think, for some contention or confrontation here. And of course, because they're both fixed signs, we're dealing with entrenched positions. And this is going to be the reason why there could be conflict and even violence if America doesn't watch itself. Now, I then considered the draconic transits. Is there better news to be found in the draconic news? draconic transits? Well, the Mars-Uranus conjunction is moved to the second house and is now in Aquarius. Now, the problem with that is that it makes it square to the Scorpio energy. And that's just as bad as the opposition in a sense. In many ways, it's more problematic. It's in the second house, which has to do with the economy. In mundane astrology, it has to do with the exchequer, things like that. So with Aquarius here, we're looking at pioneering new ways. We're looking at change. Think about Scorpio and Aquarius as both signs of fundamental changes, but they work in different ways. Scorpio does it by unearthing, by going through everything. It's very thorough. Aquarius is more inspirational. It's actually quite the awakening almost, but in its own way is as intransigent as Scorpio. So you have all this fixed energy in a sense. It's almost like a sort of broad T-square here between the tropical and the draconic. And what's also interesting is that with Aquarius, what's interesting is that all the Scorpio energy that we see, except for Mercury, is actually in the 11th house, which is the domain of Aquarius. Now, it's often said that Uranus, which in modern astrology rules Aquarius, is in its exaltation in Scorpio. So there is a sort of hidden advantage here to, in the mundane sense, to authority, to America's leadership, because the 11th house is related to the institutions of government, such as the Senate and so forth. So overall, I'm seeing in this chart quite a lot of division and the potential for violent confrontation, given the nature of the energies. They're so intransigent. There's not a great deal of mutability when you look at the key aspects here. Let's have a look at Joe Biden's chart. The inner wheel is Joe Biden's birth chart. You see it's quite heavily Scorpio here. A lot of people are surprised by that because he seems such a conciliatory, pacific sort of individual. There are reasons for that. We'll come to that maybe. But essentially, the inner wheel is his birth chart. The outer are the transits for Inauguration Day, the 20th of January. And the outer are the draconic transits. And interestingly, the chart, generally speaking, structure is not wildly different from what we saw in the US chart. So for example, we still have the Mars and Uranus conjunction in the tropical system opposing all this Scorpio, which starts in the 11th with Pluto, which in itself is it's in a powerful position because in modern astrology, it's in its domicile in Scorpio. And of course, it's quite close to the natal Mars as well. So there's quite a lot of power struggle here. But it's going into the 12th house too, which takes us into the area of hidden enemies and so forth. There are lots of positive associations with this too. A lot of leaders have a lot of 12th house energy. But once again, it's interesting too that this conjunction is sufficiently close to the moon to draw in the America's natal moon. And it's interesting to notice too, I just noticed this, that the tropical Uranus is actually conjunct Joe Biden's part of fortune. So, sorry. Slip of the fingers there. Sorry about that. The tropical Uranus is conjunct his part of fortune. So the nature of his presidency is going to be about healing, a restoration, that sort of thing. And part of fortune actually is a positive for him. It actually helps him, I think, in many ways. But because of the oppositional nature, and given that both energies, Taurus, Scorpio, are said to be fixed, they're fairly flexible, very determined. So in another sense, we're also looking at an expression of contention within the chart as expressed throughout the nation. It's also interesting to note in passing that Draconic North Node, which is actually the starting point for the whole of Draconic astrology, is now in the 4th house, which is the house of the people. So the greatest challenge is going to be to win the people over. This is the great challenge, not helped by the fact that the nodal axis has Neptune bang in the middle of it. Neptune is not all bad, but in this context could be confusing. It could introduce factors which are not easily understood. There could be division between power and the people for reasons which have to do with, I don't know what you would say, but certainly with factors which are not readily understood. It's a very complex sort of aspect, this, but its basic message is that things are not going to be straightforward to do. Yeah, I mean, you could say, we all know that. Tell us something we don't know. But once again, I just reiterate, it's always important to understand that if you can see the expression symbolically, then the fact that we know it already doesn't disprove what I'm saying. It just simply demonstrates that there is a symbolic way of expressing the aspects. So that Neptune probably is not going to help Joe Biden. I think there is going to be a bit of a communication problem between in that relationship, because it's in Libra, so it has to do with that relationship between the people and the power. And just to reiterate that point, that last point, we see, as we did in the last chart, Mars, Uranus are now moved to Aquarius, and still squaring all this energy in the 11th and 12th houses, but now in the 3rd house. And what's interesting is that the conjunction implicates the tropical Mercury, 18 degrees in Aquarius. And because of the square to Scorpio, I do think, and because it's in the 3rd house, which is the domain of Gemini, so we're talking about communications, we're talking about the speaking, excuse me, the talking, the expression. What we're looking at here is a fundamental challenge to get that message across. And I think that perhaps one of the dangers with Scorpio, even though there are so many great things about Scorpio, Scorpio seeks to heal through thoroughness, through addressing the core issues, not trying to sweep them under the carpet. What Scorpio does, it will dig under the carpet to find the problems. It won't be sweeping anything under the carpet. Any Scorpio probably will relate to what I've just said. And just as a final thought, it's interesting to note that in the tropical system, we've got all this energy, a mixture of the cardinal and the fixed in the house of the economy, of the house of the national income. So much energy is going to be directed at, in a sense, changing the economy, because there's a lot of revolutionary and pioneering energy going on there. So I'm going to stop the share now and just say bye-bye. My name is Victor Oliver. If you want to know more about Draconic astrology, or if you want to have a Draconic reading to find out about your life purpose, your karmic purpose, that sort of thing, then go to victoroliver.co.uk. That's Oliver, O-L-L-I-V-E-R, victoroliver.co.uk. And I have a shop, and unlike a lot of people who practice my work, I actually price my work, and you can order as, you know, you can make purchase orders and it comes straight through to me, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. I will, of course, need your birth data to do it. Everything is confidential. No one will know what you're doing. It's all very secure, and the payment details are governed by PayPal. So there's buyer and seller protection as well. I hope you found this talk interesting and stimulating. I do understand that perhaps if you're not familiar with Draconic, or even not familiar with astrology, it's not going to mean a great deal to you, but I thought you might be interested in knowing what at least one astrologer thinks of the current situation. But thanks for joining me, and I'll be putting out further videos and podcasts in the future. Bye-bye.